Have you ever pondered what would happen if you discovered that some of your customers aren't real when you visited the bank one day? This was the beginning of my relationship with the unexplainable, which led me to delve deeply into a mystery I never thought could be present in the mundane routine of my work as a bank teller. Before I discovered something odd in one of the security camera recordings one morning while going over the footage, everything appeared to be normal. A customer was coming at my window. Although he had a normal appearance, I saw how his form vanished from the tape as like he had never been there. This disturbing realization was only the start of a sequence of incidents that would make me reevaluate how I view the world. The routine of deposits and bank transactions grew more and more annoying every day. Some of the clients' features began to look familiar, but when I listened to the recordings, I was horrified to realize that the same customers were vanished. I initially assumed it was simply a camera glitch, but as I noticed that their deposits consistently included cash from tragic years, the reality began to surface like a specter in the back of my mind. The strangeness wasn't just in the recordings, though. As the days went by, I started to hear whispers and sense that someone was close by when I was alone myself in the bank, particularly in the deposit area. Those voices seemed to be calling to me. One afternoon, after hearing their tales of death and hopelessness over the years, I made the decision to learn more. When the bank's silence overwhelmed me and my heart began to race, I stayed after closure and went through the files of the deposits I had received. All of them were bills from troubled historical periods. Bills from 1992, the year of several murders in the city, and 2001, a year of local tragedies. While I was browsing through them, I felt like someone was seeing me, but when I turned to look around, no one was there. Nevertheless, the air became heavy and dense, as though a shroud of misery and history had descended upon me. I started making connections between the clients who weren't visible on the cams. As though the bank was a portal between the worlds of the living and the dead, the grim bills, I made the decision to speak with my coworkers about what I had saw and experienced, but rather of receiving encouragement, I got suspicious looks. One of them responded, "Perhaps you're just stressed out," in an attempt to reassure me. But doubt had set in, and I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something really unsettling was going on. I began my own research by researching up on the building's history where our bank was located. I found out it had been built on the site of an old graveyard. This thought stuck in my head like a rusty nail, and I kept thinking about what it meant. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and anxiety, I made the decision to stay even later one night. The silence of the bank was oppressive, broken only by the clicking of my computer and the soft sound of the air conditioner. When I listened to the latest recording, I was determined to find the truth. That morning I noticed a customer who had deposited money. I felt a chill go down my spine as his face looked familiar. The man was grinning as I rewound the tape, but his smile twisted as though a sinister secret had suddenly been imprisoned within him. I was astonished when his image disappeared. Fear gripped me and my heart raced. Armed with a flashlight, I made the decision to investigate the bank's basement because I was determined to face my concerns. It was rumored that records and ancient papers had been kept there unopened for years. The air grew heavier as I went down, and I felt a feeling of fear among the dusty boxes. I discovered a folder with historical records about the bank. As I read the names of some of the clients who had vanished from those tapes, my heart stopped. Some of them even described unsolved murders, and all had been connected to violent and terrible deaths. The cash I accepted at my window over the years appeared to have been brought into the present from the dark by hands that shouldn't have been there. I sensed a movement behind me as I closed the folder. As the temperature dropped, I briefly believed I could make out figures moving through the shadows. The sensation of being watched grew stronger as I rapidly swung around. But nothing was there. It seemed as though the ghosts of those customers were requesting justice or even recognition from someone who could still see them. I was glad to get out of the cellar when I came up to the surface, but I couldn't shake the vision of the faces of people who had passed through my hands. I felt as though I had uncovered a sinister secret that the bank had been keeping for many years. My life at the bank was a real agony after that night. I felt as though I could feel the weight of their stories every time someone came to the window. The reverberations of a painful past. One day, an old man with a soiled bill in his hands came up. His eyes were nearly vacant, as though he were caught in a time warp. He was speaking in a barely heard mumble as I served him. I looked at the bill he gave me after he left. The date was from 1985, a year when the city saw a spike in crime. I could no longer deny the ominous coincidence. The relationship had grown too real. I made the decision to speak with my coworkers once more the next day. This time, I talked about what I had learned about the bank's history, the deaths, and how the bills appeared to be connected to them. While some were doubtful, others started to see how terrible the situation was. Something unexpected occurred during the stress. I was shown an old client registry book by a coworker. I came across names on the yellow pages that spoke to people whose pictures did not appear in the cameras. There was no denying its connection to something sinister and horrifying. I was able to persuade a few of my coworkers to join me in my search for answers once I shared it. With my coworkers' help, we made the decision to look into the bank-related killings more thoroughly. Our investigation turned up a number of unsolved incidents that appeared to be connected by a troubling pattern. The bells that I had begun to worry about were more than just pieces of money. They were now a symbol of an unending chain of tragedy as the shadows of the past came to life, and we descended more into a labyrinth of terror and agony with each discovery. As we dug deeper, the intensity of the events increased. We got strange looks from customers and occasionally felt presences around us. The atmosphere in the bank grew heavier, as if a veil of pain and desperation enveloped us. Gradually, our investigation revealed the stories of those who had been victims. We learned that many of them had been young people with hopes and dreams who had been brutally murdered. We decided to meet in a coworker's office one night to discuss our findings. As we were talking, the lights started to flicker and the air became cold. Then we heard a knock on the door, which made our blood freeze. When we opened it, we discovered an envelope containing a number of photos of the customers we had been looking into, each with their death date on the back. We were shocked and felt a chill go down our spines because we knew we had touched on a topic that someone wanted to keep secret. We realized that what we had unleashed was not just a mystery, but a warning. So we decided that the best course of action would be to leave the bag, but not before taking steps to release the souls trapped in those damn bells. As we closed the bank the following day, we realized that although our lives had returned to normal, the memory of those dark days and the souls that crossed our path would never leave us. I learned that some stories should remain in the shadows, and that sometimes the most mundane routine can hide terrifying secrets that are closer than we imagine. As I close this chapter, I want to remind you that every time you visit a bay, be careful with what you touch and with whom you cross paths, because the faces you see may not be what they seem. That night, we held a small ceremony in the bay, offering prayers and remembering those who had been forgotten seemed to ease the strange pressure in the air. The next one. Life may be peculiar. Do you not think? Consider being a regular electrician who gets a call one day from a house that has been unoccupied for years. Are you brave enough to go? I kept thinking about that question when I got my first call. I'm David, an electrician in a small city neighborhood. I fix wires, install lights, and fix electrical issues on a daily basis. But I never thought my job would lead me to cover a mystery as sinister and upsetting as the one I was about to confront. At first, I thought it was a practical joke. Abandoned houses with broken windows and a desolate appearance make it obvious that no one dares enter. But my curiosity, that natural urge we all possess, pushed me to take on the challenge. A residence near the end of Elm Street made the initial call. They informed me that the lights were flickering oddly, as though they were trying to speak. When I got there, a tense, quiet cloak of mood surrounded me. Dust and cobwebs littered the entryway when the door creaked open. I felt the eyes of the past observing me from the shadows as I entered, flashlight in hand. I initially thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but as I pointed the flashlight toward the ceiling, the lights became brighter, as if urging me to decipher their meaning. At that moment, I stopped being just an electrician and became a messenger for the forgotten, those who had once lived within those walls and had somehow left their mark on the world. The hallway lights started to flicker, but this wasn't just an electrical failure. It was a code, a rhythmic pattern that linked the lights in a message I couldn't ignore. The flickering became more frenzied as I followed the light beam through the house, and I felt a chill go down my spine. It was attempting to tell me a narrative, and in the room's darkness, I could see an old wardrobe that had been left closed carelessly. When I suddenly opened it, I discovered a shabby diary with yellowed pages that were jam-packed with scrolls. I started reading the final words penned by a resident who had been confined to that terrifying and unsettling place. It described odd happenings, lights that changed on their own at night, laughing echoing in the deserted living room, and shadows dancing in the corners. The anguish that had gripped that family, a misery that not even death could erase, was made clear by that writing. I started to feel uneasy, but I knew I had to continue. The awkwardness of my footfall echoed in the dense silence as I walked out of the room. I felt like every door I opened screamed in unison, pleading with me to reveal a truth that had lain hidden for years. The lights in the hallway then started to flicker more erratically as they started to play again. My heart pounded. They were leading me to a certain corner, I was sure of it. The flickering turned into a desperate SOS recitation as I arrived at a chamber at the rear. I feared the worst because of the combination of anxiety and adrenaline. What had taken place here? Who were the spirits that continued to wander these areas? Even though I know the outside didn't seem as bleak as the house interior, suburban life went on, with kids laughing and people passing by without turning around. They were tethered to a reality from which they were unable to escape. But inside those four walls, as I brushed some dust off the glass, time seemed to have stopped, paused by the consequences of poor decisions and secrets maintained. Using my fingertips, I saw something written on the glass. After I gently cleaned it, Amelia's name appeared. One of the residents had that name. Was the ghost of the mother of the family that had mysteriously disappeared beckoning me? Did her anguish still resonate? As I knew I had reached the end of my options, the atmosphere inside these walls became oppressive and heavy. My footsteps reverberated in the stifling silence, and Amelia's words kept repeating in my head. The diary described a fateful night when the family heard whispers coming from the basement. Their children refused to go down, but fear and curiosity pushed the mother to whisper that everything was okay in the end. All that was left of her life was now an echo in the walls of a house that refused to forget her story, which was locked in that diary and turned into a heartbreaking cry for justice. There were no signs or warnings that horror was about to be unleashed, and the breath of the house surrounded me in a freezing embrace as the frantic flickering of the lights reached a suffocating climax. I determined I couldn't leave until I understood what had happened, since I was running out of options. I went back to the diary and, reading it more carefully, came across a line that described a ritual they may have carried out in a last-ditch effort to gather strength to protect themselves from a sinister spirit that had started to haunt them. Those words rang like a warning in my head. One voice cried out for me to get out, but another voice held me securely in place. As I considered my options in the face of the impending darkness that engulfed my consciousness, the struggle between duty and terror persisted. I made the decision to take action. Something changed in the air, so I turned around and headed back up the stairs. The house that had been my office had now become a maze of darkness. The air became heavier with each step I took, and the whisper turned into an unfathomable, heartbreaking scream. The final warning, "Do not look back," flickered as panic took over my thoughts. Every step I took and every fiber in my body told me I had to get out, but I was compelled to know and comprehend, which ultimately kept me there with an almost supernatural sense of will. I overcame my nervousness and began to up the stairs. The air felt unexpectedly clear when I got to the last step. I inhaled deeply and turned to look behind me one last time. The lights let off a last flicker and went out in their last act of life. As I left the house on the cold night, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that there was yet more, something I might never be able to untangle. The weight on my chest started to drop as the breeze swept over me. With the diary and the medallion in hand, I headed back to my truck, knowing that the tale of Amelia and her family would become ingrained in me, and that I would never again view an abandoned house in the same way. A reminder that there are voices calling to be heard in every forgotten location and every shadowy nook. I realized that my work was more than just fixing lights and wires. It was a link between the past and the present. That night, as I got ready to go to sleep, I wondered how many more stories were out there in the dark, waiting to be discovered by someone. Please remember to subscribe to the channel and leave a like and comment if you like this story. I ask you to join me on this voyage into terror and the unknown, because every story has its own life of its own. Thank you. See you later.